Welcome to the France 24 debate. Education ministers around the world have been biting their nails, waiting for the results of a global education survey. It's carried out by the OECD every few years, and it has become the ultimate litmus test by which to judge a country's school system. It measures students' ability in maths, science, and reading. Let's look at the latest results. Maths, you see Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong in the first three positions, number 1, 2, and 3 respectively. France and the UK, number 25 and 26 out of a total of 65 countries measured in these surveys. Science results showing pretty much the same kind of results. The East Asian school systems scoring the highest: Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, once again, number 1, 2, and 3. France and the UK in the mid-20s. And literacy results show pretty much the same thing, with East Asian systems scoring the highest, France and the UK also in those middle rankings in the mid-20s. So East Asian countries top the world rankings, that's pretty clear. European countries such as France and the UK struggling to compete. France in particular sliding down the rankings, despite spending more on its schools than other countries. In the France 24 debate, we ask, how do you prepare today's kids for tomorrow's world? How do you make sure they leave school with all the right skills? Well, let's put those questions to our panel this evening. Jiajia Wang is with us. She's a professor of Chinese culture at Sciences Po Le Havre, went to school in Shanghai, remembers very clearly how that was and how that still is, and will be telling us about that culture and education system tonight. Adrienne COVINGTON is with us. You're head of the middle school for the American section at the Lycée International de Saint-Germain-en-Laye. That means you have this dual perspective of how the French system works. You're fully grounded in the French system, but you have a little niche of students who want an American flavor to their academia. And Elisabeth MOUTET is with us, France 24 regular, your columnist at the Sunday Telegraph. Good to have you with us. And Michael Davidson, is going to be very interesting to get your perspective because, of course, your team at the OECD worked on this report. You're head of the, now this is a mouthful, head of the division responsible for early childhood education and schools in the Directorate for Education of the OECD. And because the main results of these findings actually concern the maths ability, we have a maths teacher who's with us live from London via Skype, Jeff Hughes, a teacher in a secondary school. Jeff, we have a maths problem for you later on in the debate, so let's hope you get that right. Otherwise, I will be worried for your students. Mr. Davidson, what are the major trends in these findings? What's new about these findings? East Asian countries top the rankings. We sort of expected that.
Well, so 65 countries participated in this. This is the fifth round, the fifth time that we've conducted PISA. And as your graphic showed at the beginning there, in this particular round, Shanghai, China, Hong Kong, China, and Singapore come out top on each of reading, maths and science, maths being the main focus of this one. What's different is that those countries are starting to push ahead, whereas back in 2009, the last time we did this, you could see North America, Europe, Australasia represented in those top ranking countries. Now, 7 out of the top 10 in mathematics are coming from Asian countries. But that's not to say they're the only success stories. There have been great successes. 40 countries of the 65 that participated made some improvement in either reading, maths and science. And what you see is improvement at the top, so the Shanghais and Singapore who have gone from good to great. But we've seen countries like Poland and Germany who have gone from maybe adequate to good, and countries like Poland, Italy, Greece who have gone from maybe inadequate to adequate, poor to adequate. So we're seeing improvement across the piece. Other trends is not only are we looking at sort of average performance of systems, we're also looking at how equal education systems are. So it doesn't matter which social background you come from as to whether you succeed or not. So we can see countries...
Equal in terms of the ability of the school system to produce a certain standard of ability? Among different social classes? Is that what you're talking about?
Essentially, yes. So that your social background doesn't determine whether you succeed or not. So the successful education systems are ones that that relationship between social background and performance is weak. So you beat the odds based on your origins. And amongst the countries that have improved in between 2003 2012, Turkey, Germany are two of the countries that have improved not only in terms of quality but also in terms of equality. So the narrowing of that gap between students from different social backgrounds. So these are the trends that we're seeing. It's not all about the Asian countries. There are success stories throughout the 65 that participate. Some other things that we've seen, we've been looking at students' anxiety or confidence in mathematics and how that relates to performance. Disciplinary climate in schools has improved in many countries. The relationship between students and teachers, so the extent to which students feel that the teacher supports and understands their needs, these things have improved as well. So there are some good stories across the piece.
Why do world leaders, education ministers, why do authorities care about your survey? Why has it become so important? It is the authority, and it became the authority in a matter of years.
Well, yeah, we started this in 2000, and why is it important? Because, you know,
Why do people trust it, is the question.
Well, why is it important, first of all, is this globalized world, and no longer is it sufficient to judge your education system or any other aspect of national policy. No longer is it sufficient to judge that by national standards. You want to see how good you are internationally, so that the benchmarks, important though they are nationally, become international. In terms of, for the individual, we know from our studies that individuals who do well in reading, maths and science will succeed later in study and later in employment. It's important for economy. We have some estimates that say that if all students across the OECD countries increased their performance to what we call the basic foundation level, this would add something like $200 trillion to the wealth of nations over the lifetimes of these students. So it's important for the economy, for social, and for the individual's participation and success in life.
Are you confident that this is a good way to test education systems which are by definition shaped by various national cultures?
In short, yes. I mean, you might expect me to say that, but
Can you really compare an East Asian country to France, since that's what we'll be talking about, or to the US with very different national cultures?
We believe we can, and the countries that participate believe we can. So this is labelled an OECD study, but this is developed and owned by the countries that participate. So what PISA measures and why it measures reading, maths and science is determined by the countries themselves. They see those three foundation skills as important. Of course, it doesn't measure everything that's going on in schools, but they collectively, the 65 countries, accept that these are the three things that we need our kids to be able to do and be competent in order to succeed later in life. The test is developed not by a small group of OECD staff locked in a room. This is developed by international experts from around the world. The countries that participate can contribute items to the test, and there's a process through which that test is validated for cultural bias by the participating countries. So if a test item is developed that a country says, well, no, this is not fair for my students, that item would be excluded from the test.
Adrienne COVINGTON, is this a big deal? Do schools look out for this?
For the PISA report? I would say responsible administrators, sure, because this kind of thing is very interesting. It's part of our profession because a well-educated populace fuels the country's economy. So if you're invested in where you work and in your school, then yes, this kind of thing is very important for sure.
Well, I'll tell you, the report has certainly the French education system worried, all the way up to the Prime Minister. Let's listen to Jean-Marc Ayrault. He hopes this report is going to be a national wake-up call.
This report must be a wake-up call for those who think that everything's fine and nothing needs to change. Our government wants to implement reform so that all students are educated and no one is left behind.
Michael Davidson mentioned some of the many success stories that are highlighted in this report. He didn't mention some of the countries, such as France, that are actually doing worse than they were in the previous report. He did mention that maths was the main thing that was being tested this time around. Let's go to a maths class in France and find out how maths is being taught.
1969 and modern mathematics arrives in French secondary schools with the aim of developing numerical excellence for all.
La symétrisation. Oui.
Et ce qui formait un groupe, et enfin la commutativité.
C'est ça.
On va t'en écrire une barre et 11 unités en base 12.
But everyone was a bit lost.
Comme c'est mère de famille, je suis retournée à l'école pour me recycler en mathématiques modernes.
The level of abstraction discouraged many students who soon gave up.
Les petits sont paniqués par l'incompréhension.
Now in 2013, it's like stepping back in time. Before moving on to abstractions, this class starts with a concrete problem. The aim is to give students the desire to think and discover for themselves, though it's as laborious as ever.
Et combien mesure OH? Eh ben, on a supposé qu'il fallait faire Thalès. Mais,
Thalès.
Ouais.
They get Pythagoras' theorem, they get the square root too. It's all about gathering all the knowledge you have and applying them. I explain the class I give at the end, so everyone has understood what I've been talking about through 10 exercises.
But this teaching requires 3 teachers and a maximum of 25 pupils per class, which is far from being the norm in France, and students continue to give up.
Tell me honestly, do you like maths?
Not really. I find it difficult.
In a new documentary, the French mathematician Cédric Villani bemoans the amount of people who admit to having been the worst in maths at school.
I think the big failing of current teaching is, firstly, it leaves many students to their own devices, which causes lots of frustration. And all this, while if you look at our best mathematicians, the ones who win the Fields Medal, the most prestigious prize, well, we have probably the best maths school in the world, or one of the best.
And France does well at the Fields Medal, the Nobel Prize of Maths, second only to the United States in medals won, but at the same time 1 in 4 French maths students throw in the towel.
So apparently we're not a very maths-oriented nation here in France. Let's go to Jeff Hughes, a maths teacher in a secondary school in London. Find out if it's the same for him. Jeff, the students that you're teaching, they're 15-year-olds. I should stress that the PISA test actually tests 15-year-olds, so we're talking about the same age group here. How do you assess the level of interest for the subject matter in your students? We heard in that report that a lot of students tend to throw in the towel and they don't place a high value on maths teaching as a whole, as compared to other countries.
Well, what I find is the vast majority of students want to learn, want to make progress, want to do well. They encounter obstacles in various forms, one of which is the self-esteem is a huge part of it. So if they feel like they're not successful, that has a negative impact on their attitude towards the subject. But I would agree that there's generally more of a tendency in the West in general to sort of not be too worried about the fact that you're not good at maths. In the sense, I hear adults say, "Oh, I was terrible at maths at school," and almost laugh it off. And you wouldn't hear someone say the same about reading. No one would ever say, "Oh, I can't read," and laugh about it. But people seem to say that about maths and their ability to do it. So in terms of as a culture, as a society, we're not really that good at raising the importance of being able to do maths and seeing it as something that we should be proud of being able to do and kind of ashamed of not being able to do, if that makes sense.
What determines whether a student is going to be good in your class or not? Are there independent factors that you can single out that determine whether a student will do well or not?
Well, I mean, in my classes, I have a small sample of the UK population. I mean, I know from the data that there is a gap between the students in the UK who come from lower income backgrounds and those who come from sort of more comfortable socioeconomic backgrounds. Personally, I see a broad range. I see students from I work in a comprehensive school, and I see students from very difficult circumstances achieving very highly. So there's no doubt that some people have more of a natural ability to work with maths, but there's also the hard work aspect, and you get students who sort of move from being average achievers to well above average achievers through sheer sort of hard work and determination.
Now, let's compare that to Jiajia Wang and what you experienced when you went through the school system in Shanghai. You told me when we were preparing this debate that hard work, for instance, is a primordial value in the education system, in the national culture, and it's something that the parents drill into the kids.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the parents, they accompany the kids from the end of school to the beginning of the bedtime, throughout 5 hours time with their kids.
So the end when kids leave school around you told me 5 p.m.?
Yes, around 5 p.m. And when they finish their homework, it's around 10 p.m. even for 8-year-old
They do homework from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Almost that, yeah, or saying around 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. or
These
to 11
are kids who are
p.m.
how old?
From 8 years old, 7 years old.
At 7, 8 years old, they do homework until...
Oh, we are studying at kindergarten even. I mean, for 4 years old, it's 5-day courses every day and 6 hours per day. So that's our national...
That does not square with my recollection of going to school here in France. Anne Elizabeth went to school in France and in England. Is that anything like what you did?
Strangely enough, it wasn't in math. I had one Latin teacher at French school who was like that. He gave us lists of verbs, and we hated those verbs. We had to write all the tenses, and it took hours and hours and hours. And I will say one thing, I remember those verbs today. So there's something to be said. And I remember my preposition governing the dative in Latin. To this day, I can recite them.
Next time we do a debate in Latin, we'll make sure to invite you.
But that wasn't the way. That wasn't the way most things were taught. And to preempt your question, I wasn't terribly good in math at school, but I was tutored. And then
I was going to be polite and not ask.
You may. 1 year I was quite good, and I was quite good for a combination of work and tutoring, which means that you can be made to achieve anything because my nature is really literary. I mean, it's always been. It wasn't sort of the thing that you do because you can't do math. But if you are made to understand why you do the problems and why there is a theory, where it can lead you. And I was let through the space, the space programs, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I was told, if you know this and that, you can find your way about space. And that was the way to unlock it. And then I learned it, and for 1 year I was really good. And then I sort of let it lapse. But that was laziness. That was not, it's my fault. It's nobody else's fault.
Jiajia Wang, can you imagine, Jeff was telling us earlier that sometimes parents say, oh, well, I wasn't very good at maths. It doesn't matter if my kids aren't very good at maths. Can you imagine parents in Shanghai saying that?
No, I cannot imagine that. I should say that the parents in Shanghai, they will probably say, oh, I'm not good in maths, but it's not your problem. You have to be good in maths, or you make an effort to be good in almost everything if you can. So that's almost the phrase that we pronounce, that the parents pronounce in Shanghai to their kids.
All right, we'll get back to that in just a moment. Let's just take a very short break, and we'll be back right after this.